Malaysia News.
Dr. Mahathir Mohamad was the Prime Minister behind Malaysia's modern progress for over 2 decades. Some say he was outspoken, critical, and even authoritarian.
He was a kind of a Jekyll and Hyde character, Mahathir.
Mahathir is a complex person, as one close acquaintance told me, so likable and worthy of respect at times, and so ruthless at others.
He simply is a man who just couldn't tolerate any dissent.
He can be abrasive at times, but he is a thoroughly decent person.
He's not that mysterious. He's an open man. He's frank.
He wasn't doing any of this for himself. He was really wanting to do this for the country and bring it forward.
Mahathir was outspoken for his own reasons.
I'm a politician through and through, and for me, I need to see this country go on growing and be highly regarded. So if I see something wrong, I have to make my views heard, and if there is anything I can contribute, I would like to contribute.
We are actually very strong. 1.3 billion people cannot be simply wiped out. The Europeans killed 6 million Jews out of 12 million. But today the Jews rule this world by proxy. They get others to fight and die for them.
He is a man who, in his recent years as Prime Minister, has made an art form of outrageous statements.
His language should be condemned by every world leader.
Dr. Mahathir Mohamad was known worldwide as an outspoken and charismatic leader. But at home, Mahathir's private life revealed a different personality.
That's my father. That is your great-grandfather.
Looks like Charlie Chaplin.
No, his mustache is different. It's not like Hitler's mustache.
Mahathir Mohamad was born in this house on July 10th, 1925 in Alor-Setar, a rural town in northern Malaya. He was the youngest of 9 children. His father's first wife had 3, and then with Mahathir's mother, he had 6 children. Growing up, Mahathir was closer to his mother, Wan Mas Tempawan.
She was much more inclined towards to be kinder to the children.
His mother taught him how to read the Quran.
Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan.
His relationship with his father was different.
Like many fathers in that era, tended to be stern, a disciplinarian, and rather distant from the children.
My father is very strict in the sense that when we had to do something, we had to do it. We never dared to disobey him. He had only to cough when he arrives just outside the compound of the house, and we all would start going to our books to study.
He felt that education for his sons were important, and Mahathir appreciated this fact and very grateful to him.
Mahathir's father, Mohamad, was the son of an Indian Muslim and a Malay mother. Growing up in Penang, Mohamad's conservative parents refused to let him study at the free school.
They fear that their children might be converted to Christianity. But he was so keen on education that he went to school without telling his parents. It was only after some time that they discovered that he had been attending this Christian Brothers School, where the teaching was, of course, in English.
In 1908, Mahathir's father was invited to start the first government English school in the neighbouring state of Kedah. But when he arrived as the headmaster, there were hardly any students around. Mahathir's father didn't lose hope. He knocked on every door in town, convincing parents of the benefits of an English education.
He used to tutor my brother before the Japanese occupation. I used to teach him mathematics, and since he spoke quite loudly, I learned ahead of my time. I already knew his lessons when I was still 2 years behind him.
In January 1933, Mohamad took 7-year-old Mahathir out of Malay school and enrolled him at the government English school.
Mohamad had an enormous influence on him, instilling in Dr. Mahathir the discipline, the commitment to hard work and self-improvement that became characteristic of him.
The school had a weekly tradition. Anyone caught not speaking English was fined 20 cents, enough to buy almost 2.5 kilograms of rice. But Mahathir didn't have to worry. His headmaster described Mahathir as an above-average student who was a class librarian and a serial winner of the English prize.
I like reading the magazines, storybooks, which have some stories about people who were very brave pilots who fought in the First World War. They were not afraid to die. They will do things which most people wouldn't dare to do. So this influenced my thinking quite a lot.
Despite doing well in his lessons, Mahathir recalls dreading the attention of a teacher named Mr. Hassan.
He has a habit of getting you to stand next to him while he corrects, and one finger would be ready to pinch your bottom if there is some mistake made. And sometimes, of course, he might use the ruler on my knuckles.
Mahathir's longest school holiday began on the 8th of December 1941, when the Second World War broke out in the Pacific. 16-year-old Mahathir would soon learn his most important lesson from the Imperial Japanese Army. Malaya of the 1940s was a thriving tin and rubber economy under the British, and home to many cultures. Unlike Mahathir, the majority of Malays were mostly farmers living in the countryside. On the 8th of December 1941, the Second World War reached Malaya. Mahathir's school closed. His much-desired education cut short when he was only 16 years old. With the Japanese at their doorstep, Mahathir, like most Malays, counted on the might of the occupying British Army.
We still thought that the Japanese would not attack because the British in those days were regarded as almost invincible. But then one day, of course, the Japanese attacked in Kota Baru, and they came in from Songkhla in Thailand down into northern part of Kedah. And then we started hearing the guns. We saw British troops retreating in the rain. Some of them, 1 or 2 of them were left behind, who were subsequently bayoneted to death.
The Japanese occupation proved to be a major turning point for 16-year-old Mahathir. If the Japanese could defeat the British, so could he, as he later wrote in his book. The Japanese occupation had a profound effect on the Malays. Their faith in the invincibility of the British was destroyed. The Malays were forced out of their complacent reliance on others. To survive, the Malays had to struggle for almost the first time. food was getting harder to find. In order to survive the war, Mahathir had to become a businessman.
My father told me you better go to the Japanese school. So I went and studied in the Japanese school. But after some time, I thought it is not worthwhile learning Japanese. I still was convinced that they will be defeated and their language would be useless. So I left the school and started a small shop selling rice.
On the 12th of September 1945, the Japanese surrendered. After 3 years and 8 months, at the age of 20, Mahathir's longest school holiday finally ended.
I went to the school, I was very happy. I roamed around the buildings, and that's when I started scribbling my signature all in charcoal all over the building. And when school reopened, of course they recognized my signature, and Mr. Lim Chen Chai was one of my teachers, scolded me and told me to go and rub it out.
Mahathir was no stranger to getting in trouble at school.
I tend to answer back. Teachers don't quite like the way I behave, because I give smart answers, so to speak.
Mahathir held 2 important office positions, indications that he'd become more vocal after the war. Mahathir was the chairman of the Literature and Debating Society. He was also editor of the annual school book. John Augustine, Mahathir's classmate from day one, acted as sub-editor. He knew Mahathir would take on a responsibility that was entrusted to him only if he could do justice to it. John also noted that Mahathir's writing came across strongly and clearly. Mahathir found his voice in school, and now he was taking it outside the school walls. He believed the Malays were generally backward, in academics and business. The Malays make up the majority of the people, but share only a small part of the wealth, something Mahathir was keen to change.
The Malays seems to be not participating in the economic life of the country. Of course, I didn't even know about the word economy, but all I knew was that they were not involved in business. Most of them, if they are in the town, they would be government servants, clerks. My brothers were all clerks working in the government service, and that's all. I mean, they, by comparison, of course, they were already poorer than the Chinese who traded in rice and sugar and things like that.
Mahathir joined several political parties at this time, including the United Malays National Organization, otherwise known as UMNO. It was also during this time that Mahathir grew closer to his father. In 1946, anti-British sentiments were strong, especially with the British plans for the Malayan Union. The Malays and Mahathir were furious.
It meant that everybody who wants to be a citizen of the Malayan Union can be without any qualification whatsoever. So I thought that this was detrimental to the position of the Malays.
Mahathir's passion for politics was stoked by the unfairness of the Malayan Union. In his book, The Malay Dilemma, Mahathir feared citizenship would make the Malays economically more deprived in their own country. So Mahathir put his words into action.
We gathered a few of my classmates, schoolmates, we gathered, we talked about this thing, and that was when we decided to put up posters. We had to do this at night because the blackout was still on at that time. And we couldn't go to the printing shop to do this because we feared that we might be discovered. So we bought paper from printing shop. We used potatoes, cut potatoes, and we cut off the figures on the potatoes And we use a kind of stamp pad using Chinese ink, and we printed it along a line that is put on the paper, and it looks as if it is printed in a printing press.
Mahathir's activism also brought him closer to his father.
Strangely, my father did not oppose it. He knew what we were doing. He sort of encouraged me. And later on, we did discuss politics, which was strange because I never got into such discussions with him before. Apparently, he was also agitated by the proposals to create the Malay Union. I was still 20 years old, and he was asking me questions, and well, it was, for me, it was almost a breakthrough, because I've never had any serious discussion with my father before.
The rallies were a success, and the British backed down. UMNO leaders were soon heading to London to negotiate for the country's independence. But Mahathir wasn't an UMNO leader. He felt a degree would improve his political standing within the party. His first choice was to travel to England and study law. But he also had a backup plan.
There was this team of people going around interviewing people who wanted to study medicine, and I applied for that also. So they gave me a scholarship, and I couldn't say, well, no, I am not interested in this, I want to study law. In those days, you don't ask questions. What you are given, you take.
So 22-year-old Mahathir travelled south to Singapore to start a new chapter in his life. At King Edward VII Medical College, Mahathir was very disheartened to discover that his admission grades were dismal compared to the non-Malay students. They had 6 A's, he only 3. This made him even more determined to succeed.
Mahathir fared very well in his studies, except, I think, in the finals, he had to repeat one subject. But then most of us had to repeat that one subject, obstetrics and gynecology.
Even while studying, Mahathir always found time for politics, especially the political party UMNO. While he was the president of the Muslim Student Society, he disagreed with UMNO over admitting non-Malays into the party. Mahathir also arranged for a philanthropist to help fund tuition classes for Malay students.
Mahathir was more serious. He was concerned about the conditions of the people of the land. Now that was the sort of thing which the average young medical student in Singapore did not do in those days. He was far more mature than the rest of us. Mahathir was very much a leader, not a follower. He had definite ideas of his own, which he enunciated.
Well, I had ideas that I can make some money writing for the press, for the papers. So I started writing, and of course I'm very interested in the social condition of the Malays. It is something close to my heart. I know the subject because it has interested me always. The problem of Malay farmers, problem of Malay fishermen, and women, the position of women, the position of the Malay language at that time.
Mahathir became a regular columnist for the Sunday Times, writing under his childhood nickname, Cekdet. Mahathir may have been very good at speaking his mind politically, but when it came to the opposite sex, he was at a loss for words. At the same medical school was 21-year-old Siti Hasma.
She was not a raving beauty or anything like that, but you see, I was brought up not knowing girls at all. In school, it's a boys' school. I didn't even know how to behave with girls. I keep on referring to them as he, and I used the male pronoun because I wasn't used to girls. So being in the class with a girl is to me as a great leap forward in terms of culture, Malay culture.
He wasn't impressive at all. There's nothing striking about him except that he's from a young man from Kedah, and there were many of them.
Well, Hajma was the only girl in a group of 7 Malay students, so a lot of people crowd around her, not only the Malays, but the Indians and others also crowd around her. And I was sort of kept apart. But eventually, of course, I wanted to be close to her, like everybody else, and started carrying her books.
First, the qualities of Mahathir then became obvious when he excelled in his exams.
She failed her first year examination, so I had to teach her in physics.
He was very persistent to be a tutor and free of charge, so why not?
Finally, Mahathir found an occasion to express his true feelings to Siti Hasma.
They went somewhere, caught in the rain, as he sent her back in the bus. He realized that she was in the rain, and he came back. So he said, "Why did you come back? You're wet." Then he said, "Came back because I love you."
So that was how it began.
Mahathir and Siti Hasma began their 8-year courtship.
First date, I can't remember because at the beginning we go around in a group. Then eventually I guess they fall off. He must have signaled to them that he wants to take me out.
What did I do on my first date together? I think we went to a place by the seaside on a kind of jetty, and it was great fun.
Marine Parade in Singapore, and there we had a very nice dinner.
And I suppose I can say that he wooed her and won her.
Finally, the day came for Mahathir to meet her parents.
During the university vacation, I bring my friends back to Kuala Lumpur before they go up north. And so one of them would be Mahathir, of course. And that was how he first met my parents. It was my grandmother who first approved of him before my parents did.
When he wanted to invite my sister to his hometown, he would send his family to fetch her from home. This is something that no one had done before, to show that how sincere he was towards their daughter.
My father made us promise something when he knew that our relationship is going to be very close. Made us promise that we graduate first before we have any thoughts of getting married.
In 1956, 31-year-old Dr. Mahathir proposed to Dr. Siti Hasma. They were married in a traditional Malay wedding ceremony. Politics was Mahathir's first calling. To realize it, he would have to give up his comfortable government job and risk opening his own practice. The first in his town for a Malay. 1957 would be a year of tremendous change for both the British colonial outpost of Malaya and 32-year-old Mahathir.
I was anxious to have my first child. I was quite excited, and of course I had initially wished to have a boy.
At that time there was no ultrasound to confirm, yeah. So everything was blue. My mother made everything for us blue. But Marina came. We were happy. He was just as happy as he daughter Marina.
Both of us loved her very much, so it was me a joy. We bought a nice pram, and I had always imagined myself pushing a pram with my child inside the pram.
they always say that children take the example of their parents. So my dad certainly read a lot, still does, and had a library, and I just sort of systematically go through it. And when I was little, he would read with me. I think he bought this whole children's classics series with Black Beauty and Alice in Wonderland, Heidi, all those. And he encouraged me to read them. So we'd read a little bit every night. So I think that's where it came from. And I'm very happy to see that my kids are following the same path. They read and they like to write as well.
1 month after the birth of his daughter, Mahathir celebrated his own birthday.
My dad has 2 birthdays. One December, which is his official birthday, and one in July. So my dad's birthday was registered as, I think, December 20th, 1925. It was only later, a few years later, that apparently they found a notebook with their real birthdays. And that's how my dad discovered that his birthday was 10th July, 1925.
Mahathir wasn't the only one born in December. So were the rest of his 8 siblings. Mahathir's father was a school headmaster who believed that those born at the end of the year would have an advantage in class.
The rest of the country thinks it's December, and we're always amused in December when, you know, people send cakes, or the funniest thing is, or all these astrologers try to discern his character, and we're all very amused because obviously he's not, he's Cancer. So we remind him on his birthday, 10 July, and he knows he has one day to run out and buy a present for my mom, because her birthday will be the day after tomorrow, right? So that's usually the way he works it. But if we kept quiet, he wouldn't know that he'd missed my mom's birthday, and then he would have been in huge trouble.
A few months later, Mahathir witnessed another birth, Malaya's independence.
Merdeka! Merdeka!
Malaya's new leader was Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman.
Merdeka! It was an exciting period to know that now we are going through our own country. That was also the year that I left government service, started my own practice.
Dia kalau panggil ni tak tentu masa, pukul 2 malam, 3 malam ke apa ke, nak bicycle ke, motorcycle ke, dia pergi tak, dia tak boleh.
When Mahathir became the doctor, he was the first Malay doctor in Al-Star. So naturally, they were very happy to find one of their kind, a doctor.
Many of Mahathir's patients were farmers living outside town.
Mahathir looked after them very well. When they come to see him from a distance, they have to pay their bus fares or whatever. They had no way to pay the medicines, which is very small, just 3 ringgit, which is the Malaysian dollar.
They can pay whatever they can afford. Or in some cases, of course, they owe you. They say they will pay later. So I have had instances where, when I was already Prime Minister, people coming up to me and saying that, well, I owe you $5. Here's the $5 that I owed you before. It's very touching. But I have never considered not treating patients simply because they cannot afford. I thought that would be wrong.
Mahathir would just give them free of charge. So he has been very generous in that aspect, and people eventually call him Dr. UMNO. UMNO is the political party, the Malay organization, and it stuck to him.
Well, I was flattered when this thing. I was the doctor for the political party. By that time, UMNO had been successful and had been the partner in the struggling for independence for Malaysia.
Since Marina's birth, Mahathir's family continued to grow. After Marina, he finally got the boy he wanted. After Mirzan, Melinda came, and 2 more boys. Makhzani and Mukriz. Coming from a family of 9 children himself, Mahathir had no reservations about having a big family. Meanwhile, back at his medical practice, Mahathir had another important patient, his father. Despite all his expertise, Mahathir knew this was one fight he could not win.
In those days, there was nothing much you can do for heart cases. Then one day, he refused to take medicine. And I know that his time was up.
I was with his sister, and then I got a phone call to say the father passed away. So we went, and he was at the doorstep, so waiting for us to come, and he was very, very sad. He loved his father, and I know his father loved him also, though parents of those days never showed and never expressed their affection.
Even as a doctor, Mahathir couldn't save his father, and not long after, he felt even more powerless.
My mother, she seemed to lose interest in life. She did not talk much with people. She did not eat. And then finally she just lie down and refused anything. And she pulled up her legs, and we couldn't straighten the leg because it was frozen in that attitude until she died.
As a compassionate doctor who treated everyone, Mahathir realized he'd finally been accepted as a leader in his community. But he would have to start the next chapter of his life without his parents. In 1964, Mahathir took his leadership to the next level. At the age of 39, he ran for a federal seat in Parliament for the first time. His opponent was Ahmad Shukri from the Islamic political party.
I have never campaigned for myself before. I have campaigned for other people. The area was not well developed. The roads were all dusty, and getting from one place to another was difficult. But we managed to see as many people as possible.
Mahathir's main motivation for entering politics was to help the Malays succeed in life. But it wasn't just the Malays that gave him their vote.
The Chinese voters voted for me. As a result, I won with a good majority, more than 4,000 votes.
To honor Mahathir's election promises of helping the Malays, his confrontations with political greats Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore and Malaysian Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman seemed inevitable. Mahathir Mohamad won his first parliamentary seat. It was a big step up for him. He went from a small-town doctor to an elected member of parliament.
He was already a very promising and unknown politician in the 60s, very outspoken.
Dr. Mahathir identified with a younger group in UMNO that sought to develop different policies from the leadership. They were more pro-Malay, more nationalistic.
I did feel that I have a duty to speak up for the Malays. They are not usually very vocal. They cannot argue their case.
Mahathir criticized Singapore's political party leader, calling him pro-Chinese, communist-oriented, and positively anti-Malay.
Lee Kuan Yew was much more experienced, both in parliament and in public speaking. And he tended to lecture to the House, which is something that is very irritating. So for me, what I used to do with Lee Kuan Yew was to interrupt him and ask him questions. After several interruptions, he got a bit flustered, and he ended his speech soon after that.
Lee Kuan Yew labelled Mahathir as one of the Malay ultras, or extremists. It was a label Mahathir refuted.
When you are labelled an ultra, then of course it undermines your ability to explain anything to the people, because anything that you say, no matter how factual, how true, would be considered as extreme.
Political differences proved irreconcilable, and in August 1965, Singapore separated from Malaysia. In May 1969, Mahathir campaigned to retain his parliamentary seat. He had become extremely popular with the Malays. But Mahathir neglected his Chinese voters, an act that would cost him dearly. On May 12th, Mahathir lost the election.
I felt bad, especially after losing the election in 1969. That was when I was most depressed.
The opposition won more seats than ever before. 3 days later, celebrations in the capital city of Kuala Lumpur got out of hand.
The events of May 13 are clouded in a lot of controversy. Up to now, there is no proper revelation as to what transpired.
Mahathir felt that the Prime Minister at the time, Tunku Abdul Rahman, had lost touch with the needs of the Malays.
He himself did not make an effort to help the Malays catch up with the other races. So it was because of that he began actually to lose support, especially among the younger Malays. That included me.
They sought to take advantage of those disturbances to oust him and change the policies. It was a political power play, not a conspiracy.
Fueled by the heat of the crisis, Mahathir, a relatively unknown politician, took on the Prime Minister.
Came up with a very ferocious and fairly inflammatory letter against Tunku, virtually calling for his resignation.
He recognized that he could be sacked or even jailed for writing that, but at the same time he clearly understood how unpopular the Tunku was with Malays.
In September 1969, the political party sacked Mahathir.
He was nearly detained under the Internal Security Act, but he was saved by his friends in the UMNO, I presume includes Tun Razak at the time. So he was just expelled from UMNO and went into the political wilderness.
He was very frustrated and very disappointed, but he accepted it. If that is going to be his fate, to be expelled from UMNO.
The consolation for Dr. Mahathir was that these events transformed him from being a failed electoral candidate for the Malays into sort of a living symbol of Malay nationalism.
I thought that my political picture had ended.
A dejected Mahathir retreated back to his medical practice in Al-Sitar.
I was very happy because that kept him quiet a bit. We were staying in our new house in Augusta, our own house. If not for that expulsion and that he had lost his election, we wouldn't have been able to stay in our new house at all. So it was a blessing in disguise.
Mahathir, however, didn't share his wife's sentiments.
I had just moved into my new house, and I noticed that there is always a car outside, which I presume was the police keeping watch on my house, and because of that, people were scared of coming to see me.
Since Mahathir was no longer in a political position, he was paranoid that he may be arrested at any moment. During the time it took to plant and harvest rice in the fields outside his home, Mahathir wrote what would become his most controversial book.
I did know that the Malays were very poor. They were farmers mainly, fishermen, and very few were university educated at that time. So I felt I need to let people know the problems faced by the Malays so that corrections can be made, and then they will not feel so angry over the independence not giving them any benefit at all. So I wrote the Malay Dilemma for that purpose.
For Dr. Mahathir, the Malay dilemma was whether Malay should be content to be poor people in a fairly rich country or whether they should get part of that riches.
He wanted there to be a change so that the Malay community would be just as progressive as the non-Malays.
The Malay dilemma came out when I was 11 years old, 12 years old. So I was very young, and I really don't think I could have understood it then. I was just concerned that this was something that, got my dad into a lot of trouble.
I thought there was a risk of the book being banned. Even getting the book published was difficult. No publisher in the country would publish my book.
His exile also gave 44-year-old Mahathir a chance to spend more time with his family.
My dad was very strict with us when it comes to education. There's no fooling around with education. You go to school, you did your homework, you do your exams, and we'll betide you if you didn't do well in your exams, that sort of thing. He was a very loving dad who had plenty of time for us. Because in those days when we lived in Alostar, he'd come back from work at about 4 or something. There's plenty of time for us before we had to go to bed. So he'd take us for car rides and sometimes for picnics. They say you can do what you want as long as you finish studying. At least the first degree. After that, you can do what you want. So they always held us to that.
While Mahathir was in isolation, Tun Abdul Razak became the new Prime Minister, giving Mahathir a second chance at a political future. Mahathir was forced into exile, writing a letter to Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman asking for his resignation. A year later, in September 1970, the Prime Minister resigned.
I think the Tunku was affected by that letter and he decided to step down. I still appreciated his service to the country. The fact is that he was the one who led the country to independence. For that, I was very appreciative. I was very grateful.
Tunku Abdul Rahman was succeeded by his deputy, Tun Abdul Razak.
Razak became the Prime Minister, and he was willing to accept me back into the party. And that, for me, that means that my future was rehabilitated, so to speak. I watched his policies to see whether he was going to implement some of the ideas that I had put in my books. And I noticed that he was quite positive on many of the things that I cared for.
In 1974, Mahathir won back his seat and, in an unprecedented move, was immediately appointed Minister of Education.
We weren't expecting this at all, We knew that he was, after several years of being in the wilderness, it was like coming back, but to, straight away be Minister of Education, that was quite a shock.
Well, I thought it was a great honor to be appointed as a minister. And for that, of course, I was willing to give up my practice. And I think anybody would do the same.
The job was a top post, forcing Mahathir to relocate his family to Kuala Lumpur, the capital city.
But my parents made sure that we would still go back to Alostar and spend maybe 2 weeks there, so that we didn't completely lose touch with our hometown. But yeah, it was a change in many, many ways for all of us.
After 2 years in his position as Minister of Education, Mahathir began to see a change in his boss, Prime Minister Tun Abdul Razak.
I did notice that he was dribbling saliva from his mouth, and this is a sign that he is not well, really. He said that he was going to London for treatment, and he called me aside and he told me that he is not well.
All this time, Razak was hiding a secret not even his family was aware of. It would be the last time Mahathir would see him alive. In January 1976, Tun Abdul Razak, Malaysia's second Prime Minister, died of leukemia.
Well, it was a personal loss to me. He had been my mentor, and he had been very supportive of me. So once he passed away, I thought that my future in the party might be affected.
Incoming Prime Minister Hussein On, however, surprised everyone. Over more senior politicians, Hussein chose 50-year-old Mahathir as his deputy.
We thought at the most he'd come in and be an MP or something, work his way up, and then he was Minister of Education, and within 2 years he was Deputy Prime Minister. I mean, that's pretty fast for anyone.
However, like his predecessor, Hussein On was also not well. After only 4 years in power, he made way for Mahathir.
I was told by Hussein that I would succeed him, and I then prepared my mind that I would be responsible for the whole country. So I prepared myself mentally to take over the job.
On the 16th of July 1981, in an oath-taking ceremony witnessed by the King, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad was sworn in as the Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Dr. Mahathir Mohamad telah dilantik memegang jawatan Perdana Menteri Malaysia.
He didn't realize he had political ambitions, to that level. It's not like he sat us around and said, one day I'm going to be Prime Minister. He never said that.
We have to accept the situation that he belongs to the nation, holding a very high post.
I must admit that Asma was not demanding. She didn't insist that I must be around or anything like that. And she looked after the children.
My children and I felt that we just have to support him in his work, and I took care mostly of the children's affairs so that he won't be bothered with anything that would distract him from his national duties.
I was able to do my work. I didn't feel unduly disturbed by not being involved in bringing up my own children. Because when they were a bit bigger, I played with them, I was very close to them.
Mahathir returned to his hometown to a hero's welcome. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, from student politician to full-fledged doctor, and then the country's premier. Now in the ultimate position, Mahathir would stay on as the country's longest-serving Prime Minister to help his people.
Done.
Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad put Malaysia on the world map by making it modern and progressive.
He's passionate about seeing his country develop, his people advance. I don't know how you can actually, divorce yourself from that.
It was that kind of visionary leadership which I think Dr. Mahathir provided, which I think was not quite provided by his predecessors.
It's a matter of knowing him and talking to him more often, and then you will understand his nature.
Politics is a different matter. It requires a different persona and a different performance, and he's able to deliver that. And quite often that requires him to be very outspoken and somewhat nasty.
He just couldn't tolerate a fundamental principle of democracy, that is the right to dissent.
He has his own very clear views as to what he wants to do, he believes that he's right, the world is wrong?
I'm not a populist because many of the things I do are not supported by the people. People criticize me. But I feel that over time they will understand why these things should be.
Mahathir Mohamad, from student politician to popular doctor, and now the country's Prime Minister. In 10 years, he had risen from political exile to the country's top post. He was very popular with his people, the Malays. They made up a majority of Malaysia's population. However, being mostly poor farmers, they shared only a small part of the country's wealth. Mahathir had been championing the Malay cause, and now, at 56 years old, he was in the ultimate position to advocate change. Unlike his predecessors, the West did not inspire Mahathir.
Well, I decided to look east because I found that the West had already taken for granted their growth, whereas in the East there was Japan, which was trying to recover from the World War, and they were very dynamic.
In his book, The Malay Dilemma, published 11 years previously, Mahathir had written that the Malays were economically behind the other races.
Well, I believe the poor performance of the Malays was due to their value system. And I think that if they adopt the Japanese value system, they would prosper the way the Japanese prospered. So I tried to change their value system so as to be compatible with growth, with success.
By introducing the Look East policy, Malaysians for the first time, I think, began to recognize that there are other paths to modernization, that there are latecomer industrializing countries from which one can learn from.
Mahathir's administration promised to be clean, efficient and trustworthy. He got everyone in government service to wear name tags, a way of ensuring accountability.
Dr. Mahathir hoped to instill in the bureaucracy a sense of purpose and good work habits that he himself practiced.
Well, I wake up early enough to say my prayers, and after that, of course, I had my breakfast, and I leave to be on time at the office because I have to clock in.
The punch clock system was to instill work discipline, something he saw lacking when he was the Minister for Trade.
I look out of the window at 3 o'clock and I saw the staff all going home. So I asked, why is it that they are going home at 3 o'clock? I was told that they want to avoid the traffic. That actually resulted in my introducing punch cards.
He was realistic about his efforts, though. He used to joke that at least now the civil servants had to arrive on time at work before taking their first coffee break.
Soon after taking office, Mahathir had a falling out with the British government. As a result, he asked everyone to buy British-made goods only as a last resort.
Mahathir introduced the so-called Buy British Last policy, which was also retaliation for the decision by the Thatcher government to raise the cost of fees for foreign students. Many Malaysians, like others from throughout the Commonwealth, continued to get education in the United Kingdom.
The rocky relationship started a month earlier. On September 7th, 1981, Malaysia carried out a dawn raid at the London Stock Exchange. After a 4-hour buying frenzy, Malaysia legally took over Guthrie, a British corporation of oil palm and rubber plantations. It took the British completely by surprise.
If we wanted to, we could have taken over Guthrie just like that and pay them whatever compensation we think we should give. But here we went into the market. It was unfair for the British to say that this was backdoor nationalization.
Many other Malaysians supported him and thought it was time that it was overdue for Malaysians to stand up to the British, the former colonial power, and I think he got quite a bit of support in that respect.
But more importantly, this buy British last policy was also the beginning of the rejection of trying to emulate the West in terms of modernization, and recognizing with the Look East policy, recognizing that there were alternative models of modernization.
After a year in office, Mahathir faced his real test, the 1982 general elections. His appointment as the Prime Minister was a result of his predecessor stepping down. This time, however, he had to earn the people's vote. They won easily. Mahathir and his deputy Musa Hitam were given the green light to reform the country. By now, 57-year-old Mahathir's family had grown up and were mostly away.
My parents were hankering for grandchildren for a while, and none of us kids were married or having kids at that time, not even thinking about it. So it so happened they went on an official visit to Pakistan, and my mom's program included a visit to an orphanage.
When I came back, I decided that we should adopt either Pakistani children or Afghan children. But Afghans are very proud people. They don't want their children to be adopted. So I got these 2 Pakistani children.
And then they came home and discussed it with all of us and got the okay. We all thought, okay, that's fine. And a few months later, Masa Maizura came to live with us.
With 7 children, Mahathir's family was now complete. Mahathir enjoyed being the leader, but political rivalry within his own party soon threatened his top position, something he wasn't willing to give up. Malaysia's monarchs. 9 sultans and a king were highly respected by the Malays, who formed the majority of the population. In 1984, as Malaysia was going to get a new king, Mahathir introduced a controversial piece of legislation, one that would cost him much needed support.
In Malaysia, the feeling is quite different than in Britain. In Britain, the Queen or the King would not question the Prime Minister. If a bill is presented to her, she would immediately sign the bill. So it is necessary to modify the law so that the power of the King to actually reject a bill passed by representatives of the people should be diminished.
Consequently, by the end of his first term as Prime Minister, 62-year-old Mahathir sensed trouble within his Malay political party, UMNO. People were questioning his leadership.
At that time, people did not see development in Malaysia. They don't link me with any success of the country. And because of that, there were challenges to my position as Prime Minister.
In 1986, Mahathir's first Deputy Prime Minister, Musa Hitam, resigned, instigating a call for new leadership. Whoever wins the seat of party president in the 1987 UMNO elections will be by default the country's Prime Minister. Mahathir was feeling confident.
As long as I am the Prime Minister and I am able to persuade the cabinet to support me, I will stay in power.
However, after the ballots were counted, Mahathir was disappointed by the results.
I thought I would win very easily. So I very nearly lost. I won only by 43 votes.
But Mahathir could still lose his prime ministership. His rivals challenged the election results in court. But the verdict wasn't the only thing Mahathir was waiting for.
I was pregnant and expecting my first child. It was my father's first grandchild as well. So I was a bit removed from it all. My mom came to be with me when I was about to deliver. And I remember she was always very tense. She didn't talk too much, but I know she was worried. And, you know, there's a lot of letters going back and forth.
Back in Kuala Lumpur, people were still questioning Mahathir's leadership. Dozens of people suspected of stirring up trouble were detained without trial.
Anyone who criticized him, criticized his policies, were against him, and they were a threat to his political base, and he had to do something to deter them. Not even a dog was barking on the streets at that time. That was the fear instilled.
Many of the things I do are not supported by the people. People criticize me, but I feel that over time they will understand why these things should be done.
While local press freedom was curtailed, the foreign media was free to report. Mahathir had a love-hate relationship with them.
My experience with the Western media is that they try to find the worst things about you, and if they don't find, they have a tendency to even invent and to label you. For example, I was called a dictator.
Essentially, he didn't believe in a free press, regarding journalists as basically unelected representatives of nobody. While he could control the domestic media, he disliked the foreign press because it was inclined to be critical and disrespectful.
In order for Mahathir to carry out his policies more effectively, the judiciary had to change.
Unlike our first three prime ministers who were lawyers, Mahathir was a medical doctor. He had very little understanding of the role of the judiciary, very little understanding of the doctrine of separation of powers, which is understood in the flourishing democracies around the world. He felt that the judiciary has become a threat to his entire position as Prime Minister of the country. Hence he had to do something.
Lawyers tended to focus only on the legal aspect of anything that they do, whether it is legal or not legal. But doctors want to heal. They want to put things right. So the country was, at the time when I took over, the country was not developing as fast as it should. So I thought that my duty was to increase the speed of development.
He was seen to be completely undemocratic, certainly authoritarian, and I guess his most virulent opponents called him a dictator.
Throughout the 1980s, Mahathir fought to consolidate his power. But on January 17th, 1989, he nearly lost everything.
When he normally goes to bed, this was his procedure. He would lie down, take up a book, and read. Right? And I'll be passing around before I get to bed. And then that particular night, it was about 11 o'clock already, or past. I saw him just put on his book like that, and he was quiet, looking up. And then she said, call a doctor. That was just what. And if he says call a doctor, it means there's something really wrong.
I'm a doctor. I know the signs and symptoms of heart attack, but I kept telling myself that it is not so. It's not heart attack.
When I had a phone call from Dr. Siti Hasma asking me to come immediately to Sri Pradana, and I insisted that he be admitted to General Hospital Kuala Lumpur into the coronary care unit.
I almost left in my nightgown. I forgot even that, I just quickly put on my baju kurung over my nightgown and went with him. He took in the car. It was at the hospital that he refused the wheelchair. We told him to sit in the wheelchair and just follow instructions.
He was that sort of stubborn person. But I said, no, you will sit in the wheelchair and we wheeled him up to the coronary care unit.
At that particular time, I didn't realize I was taking the Prime Minister to the hospital. I was taking my husband. And it's only at the hospital when Dr. Lubaya told me how serious the situation was that I realized that I'm bringing the Prime Minister of Malaysia to the hospital.
Being a doctor herself, Siti Hasma's worst fear was confirmed. Mahathir had suffered a heart attack.
I was really worried, because it's the first time ever that he underwent any operation, and the first time he was ill and was brought to hospital. I tried to be brave for the sake of my family, but after we kissed him before he was taken into the theater, I couldn't stand it anymore. I just broke down because I was afraid. But we all gathered together and just said our prayers for him.
There were no complications. He went through the operation flawlessly. And you know, being the sort of disciplined person that he is, his recovery was uneventful. And in a week he was up and about.
Mahathir had tall ideas for Malaysia, but an American currency trader and street protests threatened to distract him from his modernization plans. Now into his second decade as Prime Minister, Mahathir had a new agenda for the nation of 18 million people. He was keen to see a first world country emerge under his leadership.
He has now realized that Malaysia is a nation of different races and different cultures, that all the races cherish and treasure their different languages and cultural heritage, and it's from there that you build up a united nation. So he has gone through the various phases. That's why I think in 1990 he came up with this Vision 2020.
Vision 2020 was, in my view, a further effort, an appeal to Malaysian nationhood, nationalistic and more importantly a modernist view of the future of Malaysia.
I have lots of ideas. I think if you want to be a leader, you must have ideas. You see, otherwise you'll be like any of your followers.
Mahathir coined the catchphrase "Malaysia can" and urged Malaysians to aim higher than before. In 1997, Mahathir's administration sponsored an expedition to climb Everest, the world's highest mountain. And on the 23rd of May, two Malaysians, Magendran and Mohamad, declared Malaysia could. The Malaysia can spirit was contagious, even in building projects like the Kuala Lumpur International Airport and the Sepang International Circuit. But Mahathir's crowning achievement had to be Putrajaya, a new administrative centre 25 kilometres south of the capital city, Kuala Lumpur.
I think Putrajaya is something that I feel proud of, because we built this town, this city, on a greenfield site. And today you see that it has really become a real city, very impressive. Lots of people full of praise, and many countries have come to learn from us how to build a new capital.
Elsewhere in the country, change was happening. Infrastructure brought immediate benefits to Malaysians. In Kuala Lumpur, Mahathir tackled the city's annual flood problems using smart engineering. He approved the world's first stormwater and road tunnel to be built 20 meters underneath the city. Before rivers overflowed their banks, the motorway tunnel would be converted into a giant water channel. After clearing traffic, the stormwater gates would open. The lower and upper road decks would be flooded, diverting water beneath and away from Kuala Lumpur and putting it out of danger.
My dad has a great capacity for looking at all this new technology and seeing the application way before everyone else.
Tallest, the longest, the biggest structures here and there. And in that sense, it gives the Malaysians a sense that of achievement, whether right or necessary.
While modernizing Malaysia, Mahathir was also gaining notoriety on the international stage.
I have always talk very openly about my feelings regarding the Commonwealth, the rule of the British, and the role of the Western countries. Except that I expressed this only among close friends. But when I became Prime Minister, I felt that these feelings should be expressed as loudly as possible. And of course, then people say I'm very combative.
Politics is a different matter. It requires a different persona and a different performance, and he's able to deliver that. And quite often that requires him to be very outspoken and somewhat nasty.
But if you say anything at all against the Jews, then you are accused of being anti-Semitic. Are we not allowed at all to criticize the Jews if they do things which are wrong?
Mahathir found a natural ally in another outspoken leader.
Among the leaders I most admired is Nelson Mandela, because when he was released from jail, I was expecting a man who was either very bitter or very broken down. But I find no such thing. He was not angry with those who jailed him, and he was very positive about the future of his country. So this is a great leader.
He liked people who appreciated him, who showed him some respect, and the leaders of many third world countries admired him for standing up to, particularly to the United States.
Mahathir didn't think very highly of US President George W. Bush.
I find him lacking in knowledge about the rest of the world. He has no idea about countries in Asia, for example. He is very simplistic in his view, that all you have to do is to bash people up so that they will then not be a problem for the United States. So I didn't quite like his attitude.
Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, was an exception. They had a lot in common, they hit it off, and they became very, very close friends.
It was different with Australia, though. In 1993, Prime Minister Paul Keating's description of Mahathir turned into a diplomatic disaster. Keating had called Mahathir a recalcitrant.
When he commented about my not attending the first APEC meeting in Seattle, he said that I was a recalcitrant. Actually, I didn't feel much offended, but people in Malaysia felt that this was uncalled for, and many people were angry, and I had to show that I felt the same way about it. But to me, being called a recalcitrant is nothing. You see, because I've never been, I have always been the subject of all kinds of criticism by others.
Paul Keating eventually apologized to Mahathir. In 1997, Asia was thrust into an economic crisis. While Korea, Indonesia and Thailand accepted loans from the International Monetary Fund, Malaysia did not. 72-year-old Mahathir felt his team could resolve the economic crisis themselves.
One of the training of a doctor is to listen. You have to listen to your patient. You cannot interrupt him and prevent him from telling his story his way. You see, so I learned how to be a good listener and to be patient, to learn about other people's problems, to analyze them and to try and find a solution with them.
For Dr. Mahathir, his diagnosis was simple. He identified American currency trader George Soros as the most likely cause of the crisis. Mahathir prescribed a course of currency controls, including pegging Malaysia's ringgit to the US dollar. This effectively fixed the ringgit's value to a more stable currency.
If we peg, then the traders cannot play around with currency, so they cannot make any money. That's why we decided that we must not only stop the trading in currency, but we fix the exchange rate and we fix it so that we are competitive against our neighbors.
Introduction of capital controls did not cause the calamity which the IMF and others claimed that it would cause, and in fact in many other ways I think Dr. Mahathir has been clearly vindicated by recent developments.
As soon as one crisis ended, another began, one that would forever haunt Mahathir's legacy. On the very day Mahathir pegged the ringgit to the US dollar, Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim was sacked. The city turned chaotic. A reform movement gathered speed, calling for Mahathir's resignation.
He, at a time, felt he was greatly misunderstood, and he still is, that the argument with Anwar was not about economics. It was not about the economic crisis.
He was actually campaigning against me, but that didn't matter to me because I was going to step down in 1998, so he would take over anyway. But then the police reported to me about his misbehavior, and I thought that this is not a suitable candidate for the prime ministership. So I had to prevent him from continuing as the deputy prime minister, who would eventually succeed me.
Anwar was dismissed for sodomy, a trumped-up charge according to Amnesty International.
I actually interviewed the people who were involved, the girls and the driver, and they told me that actually it happened.
Dr. Mahathir believes he is right, whatever the circumstances and regardless of the evidence. Anwar's dismissal and persecution permanently stained Dr. Mahathir's reputation. Although he subsequently won the 1999 election, it showed that large numbers of Malays were permanently alienated and would never vote for UMNO as long as it was led by Dr. Mahathir.
3 years later, in 2002, Mahathir makes a shocking announcement, one that would forever change his career.
No, I have decided.
Under Prime Minister Mahathir's watch, the skyline of Malaysia's capital city changed dramatically. A towering icon was appearing in Kuala Lumpur.
We could see the Twin Towers going up. Actually, the growth of the Twin Towers, one tower going up there and competing. You could see it from our breakfast table.
Petronas Twin Towers was really a dream project because he had his ideas to build a landmark building that would bring a lot of attention to Malaysia, and it had to look wonderful.
I participated in making the decision that it should go to Caesar Pally, who proposed this Twin Tower with a bridge in between, except that I jokingly told this Azizan, the Petronas chairman, that why are you stopping at that level? Why not make it taller than the highest building in the world?
In 1996, the 88-story Petronas Towers surpassed the Sears Tower in Chicago. They were now the world's tallest buildings.
The design I took part also in putting in what I call the Islamic architectural base. The base should be 8-pointed, but Caesar Pally added kind of curve between each triangular piece. He puts a little bit more so as to increase the space.
I can tell you, he goes there almost every Sunday. He's like a chief fundo, Chief fundo is like a chief supervisor, unofficial. He loves to see this building going up. And best thing is that he wants to know how it works.
A few years later, on September 11th, 2001, another Twin Towers dominated the headlines. terrorists flew 2 commercial airliners into the World Trade Center in downtown New York.
After 9/11, Dr. Mahathir and President George W. Bush, who were natural antagonists, decided they needed each other. Bush was looking for worldwide moderate Muslim leaders, and Dr. Mahathir, at the height of his unpopularity over Anwar's dismissal, had decided to mend fences with Washington.
But it didn't last. In March 2003, America invaded Iraq.
The idea is that you can conquer a country by shock and awe and all that is a primitive, outdated idea. Today, I think war is no longer an option in the solution of conflicts between nations. There was no evidence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. So why should he attack Iraq? Yet that Saddam may be a dictator, that is Iraqi's business, not Bush's business. You can't go around changing the governments of other countries to suit yourself. The people will have to do that by themselves.
In June of 2002, just 1 month before Mahathir's 77th birthday, he delivered his most shocking political speech on national television.
Mengumumkan satu peletakan jawatan saya sebagai Presiden UMNO dan semua jawatan-jawatan yang dipegang oleh saya terdapat dalam parti. Peletakan saya sebagai pengurusi Barisan Nasional dan semua jawatan dalam Barisan Nasional.
A friend called me on my mobile phone and said, "Are you listening to this? Your dad just announced he's resigning." And I was really shocked, you know, and the first thing I thought all this, like, why is he ill, you know, and I remember my knees were really trembling. I was so scared.
I was stunned, frankly. I knew that he wanted to resign, but not at that particular moment.
I think most political leaders was of the view that this was another stage-managed job. But I was of the view that probably he was quite genuine.
As one of the best decisions he ever made.
Mahathir is the sort of person who makes quick decisions.
No, I have decided.
That is what he did. But he suddenly upset all his friends.
For years I joined the speculation about when Dr. Mahathir might retire before concluding that he would die with his boots on, as the saying goes.
I never told anybody about my intention because I always feared that if you undertake to do something and then something gets in the way and you don't do it, people will laugh at you. You know, people say, you talk only, you don't do things.
He didn't want to be there forever. He wanted time for his own life and to enjoy it like anyone else.
I had planned to resign before I'm kicked out. I have always followed my mother's advice not to overstay your welcome.
Then it turned out he wasn't really quitting immediately after all. And I thought, typical Mahathir, trying to keep everyone off balance and guessing.
One of Mahathir's last engagements was to chair the Organization of Islamic Conference Summit in Putrajaya.
For well over half a century, we have fought over Palestine. What have we achieved? Nothing. We are worse off than before. If we had paused to think, then we could have devised a plan, a strategy that can win us final victory. Pausing and thinking calmly is not a waste of time. We are actually very strong. 1.3 billion people cannot be simply wiped out. The Europeans killed 6 million Jews out of 12 million. But today the Jews rule this world by proxy. They get others to fight and die for them.
Dr. Mahathir delivered a typical, if more acerbic than usual, speech. The idea was to grab the attention and sympathy of his audience before delivering a very unpalatable, otherwise critique of the Muslim world.
Instead, it turned into a diplomatic row.
I think the President thinks those remarks were reprehensible.
Look, I think everybody knows Dr. Mahathir is retiring in a couple of weeks' time, and he is a man who, in his recent years as Prime Minister, has made an art form of outrageous statements.
The Malaysian leader wants to roll us back to the darkest days of anti-Semitic hatred. His language should be condemned by every world leader.
The part of Mahathir's speech that was not noted was his stand against terrorism. Instead, he was called anti-Semitic. Mahathir felt the Western media misunderstood him, and he had to set things right.
Lots of people make nasty statements about us, about Muslims. People call Muslims terrorists. People make such statements, and they seem to get away with it. Are we not allowed at all to criticize the Jews if they do things which are wrong?
On October 31st, 2003, just over a year after announcing his retirement, Malaysian Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad clocked out for the very last time, leaving his deputy, Abdullah Badawi, as the country's new Prime Minister.
You are 22 years as Prime Minister, you are giving it up. Not because somebody pushes you up, but it is your own decision. It's a tough decision.
From the Malay dilemma, you can realize that he wanted there to be a change, so that the Malay community would be just as progressive as the non-Malays. But he felt that he didn't actually achieve that during his tenure of Prime Minister.
Almost every year, I have appealed to them. I have even said prayers. I had cried. I had tried everything possible to convince them that they have to change. That unless they change, they cannot succeed. You see, but and after 22 years of trying, I think I have failed.
He achieved quite some success. One can see it in the way Malaysia has developed in a middle class that includes significant numbers of Malays, including many professionals that didn't exist when he came to power. At the same time, there was a lot of abuse of that affirmative action program that tends to detract from his reputation. Dr. Mahathir's 22 years in power was long for a Malaysian leader, but about standard or about average for the authoritarian leaders in the region. Suharto of Indonesia and Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore were longer. Marcos of the Philippines was about the same, so yes, he was about average.
I still get people coming up to me. Strangely, a lot of them were Chinese. They came to me, even young people came up to me and say, well, thank you, I am a product of your period as Prime Minister. So that, that makes my day, you think?
I think we have to move on without him. That's the idea of independence, that we can work our own way through. You can't have someone constantly holding our hands,
But Mahathir would not retire quietly.
I have said before that I'll be even more irresponsible after I've stepped down from being the Prime Minister. But of course, just not being the Prime Minister, probably people won't take notice of what I say. So I'll be more free to say nasty things. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
In retirement, 82-year-old Mahathir Mohamad worked as an advisor to companies including Petronas, the owner of the world's tallest twin towers.
He has plenty of time to do what he wants. I think that's what everyone wishes for themselves, right? He can write, he can travel, he can see his grandchildren, and I think he's quite happy nowadays, you know, much nicer in many ways because he's more relaxed.
Where his temperament is concerned, he has mellowed. Mellowed, I don't know, because of his political duties, or maybe because of his age, that he tends to become more reasonable, more understanding. He's a very understanding person.
In the 2008 elections, the Malay political party UMNO suffered a major loss. Mahathir felt someone should be held accountable.
You know, although I'm retired, I'm a politician through and through. And for me, I need to see this country go on growing and be highly regarded. So if I see something wrong, I have to make my views heard. And if there is anything I can contribute, I would like to contribute.
Mahathir called on his successor, Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi, to step down from his post. He made the same demand of Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman almost 40 years ago after the 1969 elections. Nothing seemed to have changed.
I knew very well that he will not keep quiet. It was not like Mahathir.
I don't think he can ever quit politics. Politics is in his blood.
No longer Prime Minister, Mahathir was now on the other side, looking in. During Mahathir's time, press freedom was curtailed and alternative views suppressed. Ironically, the same was now happening to Mahathir.
If you say anything against the government, then it will not be published. You see, if a newspaper reporter asks somebody and he says something that is not supportive of the government, it's blacked out.
Mahathir had to join the online community.
He became a blogger because he felt that the mainstream media was cutting him out, not letting him air his views, you know, that sort of thing.
In fact, even in his university days, he was already writing politically under the pseudonym of Chaidet, which is now being used in his blog.
82-year-old Mahathir started blogging on May 1st, 2008. By the second month, his blog drew 3 million hits. A year later, 19 million hits.
So people want to say these things, and they found that what I was saying is what they want to say. That is why they became interested in reading my blog.
You realize, like, wow, you know, I can say what I want. And when he said that to me, I said, you know, I've been trying to tell you this for a while now, you know. I was blogging, everyone's blogging, you know. It's the freest space because there's no editor, there's no censor. It's going to come in between, so you can say what you want.
We must thank him for the multimedia super corridor and the guarantee that there will be no internet censorship. And probably that will be his most useful legacy for the country.
In 1969, Mahathir was kicked out of UMNO after asking the Prime Minister to step down. Almost 40 years later, Mahathir walked away from the party voluntarily.
I think when he left UMNO in 2008, he was utterly frustrated that his views were not given serious attention by the Abdullah premiership.
But with the changing of a new administration, history repeated itself. In 2009, Prime Minister Najib accepted Mahathir back into UMNO, just like his father, Tun Abdul Razak, did decades ago.
You cannot predict these things, you know. The person who got kicked out in 1969 becomes the Prime Minister and stays there for 22 years. Maybe if you look at the whole history of Malaysia, all these things look like a pattern, but to me it's just life. That's the way fate goes, you know. It's karma or something.
From student activist to doctor and family man, long-term politician Mahathir Mohamad has earned both praise and criticism.
I like self-criticism. If I say something about others, I often ask myself, what about you? You see, and if I find that I'm not any better than others, then I don't think I'm achieving anything.
I think Dr. Mahathir will be most remembered for his outspokenness on any issue, against any person, any organisation, any government in Malaysia or abroad that incurred his displeasure.
Mahathir can be described as a maverick who came into the mainstream and became Prime Minister for 22 years, giving an opportunity to do what he wanted, and at very high cost at times to the nation.
At the expense of suppression of political and civil rights in the country, of virtually undermining the independence of the judiciary, curtailing press freedom, he developed the country to what it is today.
Mahathir is an honest, decent individual who calls a spade a spade. He can be abrasive at times, but he is a thoroughly decent person.
Whatever one might think about Dr. Mahathir, he was always a very interesting and challenging Prime Minister. One may agree or one may disagree with his policies, but I do think that he was very serious about modernizing the nation. He was very serious about taking Malaysia into the 21st century.
He was really wanting to do this for the country and bring it forward. I think he himself says that maybe some things he got wrong.
Dr. Mahathir is a very affectionate person in terms of family aspect, but he's also a very intelligent, I'm proud to say, a very intelligent visionary, and you can say that this is my best Prime Minister.